This is Deputy Mayor of Hillsborough, Doug Tomson. Today I'm here to do an interview with him about his life and his experiences in the town of Hillsborough. So can you first give an introduction about yourself?
Sure. Douglas Tomson. I was born and raised here in town. Grew up on East Mountain Road, which is by the Sauerland Mountain Preserve, and then now I live back by the racquetball club. I have 3 daughters and been married for what feels like almost 20 years, but I think it's actually only 18, 19 years. First elected in 2011. I was elected to a 3-year term then and 2 subsequent terms after that, so I'm in my 8th year of elected office. I'll be 9 years next year. Served as mayor in 2014, 2015, and deputy mayor in 2013, 2018, and 2019.
So describe your experiences in Hillsborough and what you generally think about this town.
I'm a little biased, obviously, being an elected official here, but being born and raised here, it was a great town to grow up in. It's changed a lot. I grew up and went to Woodford Elementary School, which is up in the mountains, probably the furthest one out there. And it was just much different. Hillsborough went from a population of 20,000 in the 1980s when I was going to school. Graduated high school in 1999, and at that point our population was probably close to 35,000. So you saw a population gain of about 15,000 in a 20-year span, which is kind of tough for a town to do, to grow, but Hillsborough being 55 square miles, one of the largest municipalities in the entire state in terms of land mass, we had the room to grow. And then we really kind of stopped growing from 1999 to 2010-11. We had a period of stagnant growth where we only gained about 2,000 to 3,000 residents, and now we're seeing sort of an uptick again because of the affordable housing mandates put on by the state. So you're seeing more building for the first time ever in town, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, that's kind of what I remember growing up, is watching the town grow. I mean, we had so many farms growing up, where the Kohl's is, the Lowe's, that shopping center. That was a sheep farm until the late 90s. There was no Otten Road Intermediate School. There was no Amsterdam. These schools didn't exist. They were just farms. So it was neat watching the town change, mostly for the better. You always have that memory of when you were growing up, you wanted everything to be just the way it was and you don't want anything to change. But that's not the reality. When you have a town that is literally picked as one of the best towns in America, we get chosen as the top 100 in survey after survey, people want to move here. So you've seen a change, but again, mostly for the best.
So what do you find significant or interesting about this town? Are there any unique historical details that you know?
So my favorite historical event of all time has to do with the Sauerland Mountain Preserve, and has to do with General George Washington. And we have a picture of Washington up there because when I was mayor, I made sure we put a picture in here because I thought it was such a cool event. So General Washington, after the Battle of Princeton, his troops went up to the top of the Sauerland Mountain Preserve. That's where they were camped out, sort of to make sure, it was a good passageway between leaving that battle and on his way out to Morristown. But came through Hillsborough. You're at the top of the hill there, and you could look down and see the Hessian troops and the British troops down in New Brunswick. So there, you see those troops there. What our troops did, the Revolutionary troops, they put corn stalks in diagonal pieces like this. So they did that because the corn stalks from far away, they look like guns. So they put all these different guns like that. So all the troops down in New Brunswick, the British troops, could look up. They saw all of these guns, and they said, "Oh my gosh, it looks like the Revolutionaries got reinforcements. We should just keep going to New Brunswick and just keep going out and not engage them again in the battle." So they did that. So basically Washington was able to trick the British to just not engage them in a battle in a town like Hillsborough and to keep going, so that way they could escape and end up going up to Morristown so they could camp for the winter. So I love that story. I think it's so cool. It's just a neat little piece of Hillsborough history that most people don't know about.
Yeah, many people don't know about Hillsborough history because it may seem as an insignificant town in the larger picture of things. But I think it's important to explore the history of our town, even though it may not be significant on the global scale.
Yeah, there's so many neat little facts like that. I mean, I could go on. The amount of Hillsborough troops that fought in the Revolutionary War was astounding. they basically would call up farmers, that's what they were, it was farmers fighting the revolution, to go to Millstone, which was the county seat at the time, and for a very brief period it was also the national seat. I think the Continental Congress, or a version of it, maybe it was the second one, met in Millstone too. So there was these amazing battles that happened there with a lot of troops that were directly from Hillsborough that captured a couple British people, including I think it was General Simcoe. You had to look that one up, but we captured some individuals that were just ravaging the countryside and just taking products from some of the farmers around here, and it was troops from Hillsborough that ended up capturing this really bad guy. So it was neat, and I think we depicted on our flag too. You see some of the revolutionary stuff there, where you have the old homesteads where we used to keep the farms, and we were founded in 1771. So scales of justice, and then of course we have technology. I can go into that later too, but a lot of neat stuff about Hillsborough. A lot of neat stuff if you take the time to learn. And when you're leaving this building later, if you look on the left-hand side, we have a display case which has some of the older artifacts too, because we had a huge Native American population prior to, and you can just see some of the history of the town that's in there. It's neat, and we have great books in the library that discuss it too. Especially a book that was done for the bicentennial that you can grab and you can look through it, and it just tells all the things about Hillsborough.
Yeah. And another historical detail about Hillsborough that's not known is that there were slave-owning families present in this area throughout New Jersey, and as was the entire U.S. at the time. So what do you think about these injustices and the fact that it's forgotten essentially in Hillsborough's history, and how do you think we should deal with these injustices in our modern day?
Well, I'll be honest, I've never come across that there were any slave-owning families in Hillsborough. Doesn't mean that they weren't, I just haven't seen that in any of the books that I've read. I mean, if you look at all the names, we have this great map from 1860, and there's numerous families and farms and stuff on there, so it wouldn't surprise me. Obviously, there were great injustices caused many years ago. New Jersey was the only nation that didn't vote for Lincoln during the northern kind of state that didn't vote for Lincoln. So there was a lot of history here in town, in the state. Injustices exist till today. I'm hopeful that as I see in every generation move on, you see things get a little bit better, and I hope that continues. I mean, that's kind of what we're kind of based on as a nation, is that we learn from what we did wrong, we keep changing to make us better, stronger, and eventually a more perfect union, to throw in a quote from Lincoln there.
What are the biggest societal improvements you've seen in Hillsborough since your younger days?
Societal improvement. Oh, Hillsborough is a lot more diverse. We weren't when I was growing up. And I think that just makes for a stronger community. And nationwide, we've seen giant gains. I mean, we went from a manufacturing nation, a farming nation, and now we're certainly more providers of technology and informational services. And you saw that as well. The one thing that I wish Hillsborough could change, and I don't know how we do it easily, is that we're a bedroom community. You don't have a lot of people have jobs here in town. They have to travel to New York City, or they travel to a different town. I travel to Trenton every day and work out of Trenton. That doesn't really make for a perfectly well-rounded community when people have to exit. You don't get a lot of restaurants that stay open during the day or can survive because everyone just leaves. It's hard to have restaurants and other businesses survive during the day when 60% of the population goes in different directions. That doesn't help. So I would love to change that, and you start to see that change because so many people now work from home. And because of the internet and technology, you can work from, just from your house, still get the same job done, maybe go out to the restaurant. So it's nice to see like a small change, but that's like one thing that I think that we don't see enough change, is how you make a 24/7 business base here in town. But it's tough to do. You can't redo it. So it would be interesting to see how technology continues to change that in the future.
Yeah. As you said, Hillsborough is a diverse town of 40,000 residents, but there seems to be a sense of connection binding us. Why do you think that is, and why do you think community involvement is so strong in Hillsborough?
It's funny, I always say that Hillsborough is the biggest small town because, honestly, people have such a love of this town. And I wish I could tell you why that happens. I don't have a good answer. And it's funny, when I go do my day job down in Trenton, I have to go to the State House a lot. And when people say, what town are you from? I say Hillsborough. They go, you're just going to talk about it, aren't you? Because anyone from Hillsborough loves to talk about Hillsborough, and I can't tell you why. It's just that there's a great feeling. It's a great place to raise a family and to grow up. I mean, you have so many opportunities and just times that you can have fun and enjoy yourself. And maybe that's why, or maybe because you just build good memories here. I wish I could give you one quick answer, but there's not. It's just there's so many layers that make Hillsborough a great place that I think people just love it.
Yeah. Why do you think it's so important to chronicle the history of Hillsborough and other seemingly insignificant towns and to share others' experiences through stories?
I mean, you can't know where you've been unless you know where you came from. Or you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been, right? So unless you take an opportunity to look back and say, what was this town for the future, you never know if you're doing something right. One of the things that I laugh about is we have the Claremont Towers in town. It's the largest, tallest buildings we have, right? They were built as super luxury apartments when they were built. They wanted to build a helipad there because what they believed is that people were going to go right from Hillsborough to New York City. That never happened for various different reasons. The helipad was never built, and that huge commuter base to New York, like they thought was going to happen, just didn't come. And it has to do with railways didn't happen, a bunch of different reasons. But they were planning for Hillsborough to be a New York City destination, to go from Hillsborough straight to there. And unless you go back and you read about why that didn't work, we might try to plan for that again. And it doesn't make sense. We're not going to be that community. There's other things we can do to build business here and make it so that it's easier for our residents to get to where they're going, but you have to go back and look at things. And as far as just learning about a town like ours, there's just so much history here that people would just ignore. I mean, you look at that map again, one of my favorite stories is on that map. It says Hillsborough, but look at the Hillsborough. Is it spelled right? No, because when the map was made in 1860, New Jersey and the whole country was going through this anti-European bent. They didn't want to be known as Europeans, right? They wanted to say we're from America, so we had to spell things differently. So they spelled Hillsborough how Americans at the time were saying borough, and not how Europe was saying borough, spelling borough, B-O-R-O-U-G-H, right? So we had a map made with our name spelled wrong because we were trying to be less European. By 1867, after the Civil War, we had already gone back to spelling it the traditional way. But most people wouldn't know that. In another 50 years, if you didn't have someone walking around telling the story like I do, or now you, people just think we got a map done wrong. Well, it's not right. We had a map done for a very specific reason. It's because we were hell-bent against Europe at the time. So it's just little things like that. If you don't take a time to learn or to chronicle, people are going to forget that and then look at this map and just say, oh, look, they couldn't spell in 1860, which is not the case.
Yeah. So history is full of injustices. As I aforementioned, Hillsborough itself had some degree of slavery. Do you think, and this connects with the fact that there's debate over Confederate statues and other symbols of history, do you think it's more important to preserve history or erase these memories of the past and move on?
I mean, there's a fine line between preserving history and celebrating history. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the conversation, right? I go to, my daughter is in college and she goes to Gettysburg. So when you go to Gettysburg, you see that they try to tell the story of what the nation was going through without celebrating the Southern causes and what they believed in. And it's very interesting to try to dance that narrative because you certainly cannot forget the injustices that did happen. But at the same time, you can't just erase them. I certainly don't believe in Confederate statues that celebrate a culture that was abhorrent. I look at it. I mean, you don't go to Europe and see statues of Hitler. It doesn't happen. So why would there be statues of other atrocities that happened?
So what are some, how have your experiences shaped the way you place importance on history? And maybe from your family history, is there anything in particular that stands out?
Not so much in my family history. My family did come over to America in the late 1600s. They were out in Pennsylvania. And then the other side of the family came over in the early 1700s. But they were farmers. Each side fought in the Revolutionary War, and that's kind of my only big claim to fame is that they were there. I had family that fought at the Battle of Gettysburg, which is ironic now because my daughter goes there, so just a little full circle. But the biggest thing that I got so involved with history of Hillsborough had to do with Cub Scouts. My Cub Scout troop, my mom was the den leader, used to take us on just little tours around town, and one of them being this building. And there was the mayor at the time named Pete Biondi, who this building's named after. And he talked about everything about this town because he loved the history of it. And he would take us over to that map again and show us where you lived on it and whose house was here and what house was left. And it just sort of sparked a little interest in me. And then when I got elected mayor in 2014, one of the things that I really wanted to do was go back through all of our old Hillsborough Beacons, which was the newspaper. So I started reading every beacon we had, which went back to 51 is the first one I could get my hands on. And I read every one from 1951 to 1982, which is all the ones we had in paper before I had to go to the library to look at the microfiche, which I never did. Still have to do that. But I read every single thing I could read about the history, and I picked up so much knowledge from doing that, just from taking the time. And it was time consuming. I would take out a volume here and a volume there and just slowly go through them, but it really piqued my interest. And when you found out one thing, it sort of answered 12 more questions that you had that you didn't even know that you were thinking about. So that's kind of what really piqued my interest in the history of town, was definitely the Cub Scouts, but I never really lost that passion. And the more you just learned, you found so many different things about why Hillsborough is so great.
Yeah. What's the most surprising thing you found out in your readings of the Hillsborough Beacon?
Most surprising thing? Let's see. Trying to think real quick. The most surprising thing.
See you.
The most surprising thing that I probably came up with. Sorry, we had someone interrupt us real quick, so I lost my train of thought. One of the things that I always found interesting is the decisions that were made by the township committee back then that still reverberate today, whether it was choosing not to purchase some land to build something, or we had this thing in 1970, it was like 1968 sorry, that was our town administrator. From 1968 to 1973, you were unable to build anywhere in town, right? So we had a moratorium on building because before that, everyone was so angry that all this building was taking place. So we basically did a stop on building. Well, that made a lot of people really angry, namely the builders, because they wanted to build here in town to make money. So we were sued in Supreme Court to overturn this ordinance that we had that said building wasn't allowed. So we had this huge lawsuit and everything like that, that we were ultimately defeated on, and it really kicked off building that happened in 1973. And that's where you got a lot of our planned communities that started to be built then, especially the ones around Claremont Towers, not the towers, but around there, was all built as a result of this big lawsuit. And it's ironic because today, we're still dealing with these same lawsuits where we have these builders lawsuits now because of this unfair affordable housing mandate that's been put down by the state of New Jersey that says that we have to build 2,000 affordable housing units, which is a crazy number in a town like ours, but whatever, they're saying we have to build it. So it's interesting to see cyclical how these things happen, that you think, you stopped it once, it comes back, and it just keeps happening. It's a repeat of history, but again, if you don't take the time to learn, you don't realize that we've already been down this road once, and it's just another repeat of things happening.
What's Hillsborough's plan to, deal with the increasing population as well as the decreased state funding for education and other things?
So here's one important thing to understand. The township committee has no say over education, right? So you elect a town body of 5 individuals, and then you also elect a board of education. Board of Education responsible for all education funding. They raise their own taxes. That's their bailiwick, right? They're in charge of that. So as far as population and growth, as I mentioned, there's this massive lawsuit that's been going on. It has to do with affordable housing, where the state has basically said we have to build 2,000 affordable housing units, roughly. And that's subject to change in court orders and lawsuits and such. But the way it works is you can't just build affordable housing units. you have to build market rate units at the same time, or regular traditional units. So that 2,000 units blossoms to 8,000 units real quick. So if you got to build 8,000 new units with maybe 2 to 3 people in each one, right? Suddenly, you have a big strain on your Board of Education funding. And this year, you saw that for the first time, Hillsborough had a decrease in education funding. We lost about $500,000, which is pretty insignificant for 1 year, but over a 10-year period, you're looking at $5 million or more, right? So that's big. I'm hopeful that the state of New Jersey redoes their formula. I don't know if they will. The interesting thing, though, is that they said they made the formula more fair. So you can look at it a different way. For all those years, Hillsborough was getting too much money. So was that a good thing or bad thing that we were overfunded all that time? So it's kind of, you have to decide which was better, is that we weren't doing it right and then we did it right, while towns like Manville and others were being shortchanged for years, and they came up to what they should have been, while Hillsborough lost a little bit. I mean, I'm selfish again, so I want Hillsborough to get as much money as possible because for 2 reasons. One, look, I have kids in the education system, so I want the best possible. But also, it makes Hillsborough more desirable and more attractive if we have the #1 schools. I think we were ranked at like number 21 or 22 right now in terms of best schools in the state. I have a real fear that right now the Board of Education announced that they're laying off 51 teachers. If you're laying off 51 teachers, how's that going to affect our school system for the future? So I don't know what their plans are. I hope they have some good ones because I think layoffs are not the way to go. But ultimately, I think that's what they've decided. However, you have to get creative. When our budget dipped in 2011, before I was officially sworn in, there was a decision made to lay off some police officers. It was a decision no one wanted to make, but in order to balance our budget and move forward, we had to make tough decisions. I guess they're trying to make those same tough decisions down the hallway, but I hope that doesn't directly affect education in our town.
What's one most significant event, one most significant shortcoming in your life?
The most important event, you said?
Most significant accomplishment.
Oh, accomplishment. #1, having 3 kids is the biggest accomplishment, I think. Just because it's so great to have kids. You'll find out one day. It's neat. You can ask your parents. It's just amazing watching when your kids grow up. But aside that, because I know that's not what you're asking, my favorite thing I did here in town is we banned smoking in all the parks. And it's a really insignificant thing to some, but I'm going to tell you why it's so big. And you missed out on this, but growing up, you would find cigarette butts everywhere. Everywhere. I don't care if you were in a park, a beach, no matter where you were, they were everywhere. And I remember distinctly as a kid picking them up and playing with them because the filters were everywhere. You found them. And it never made sense to me how there were so many cigarettes on the ground, but there was a time everyone smoked. It wasn't a good thing. You could still smoke in airplanes when I was little, which, can you imagine lighting a cigarette on an airplane? How crazy that sounds? Yet that was commonplace. Or if you go shopping at a supermarket, people would be walking up and down the aisles with lit cigarettes, and there were ashtrays on the actual carts. Can you imagine walking through ShopRite with everyone smoking? How does that sound like a good idea? But they did it. And the same thing in our parks. People would go and just walk around the parks in the outdoors, smoking, be done, throw their cigarette on the ground, mash it out, and they think they were done with it. But the filter was still there. So what we did is we banned in all parks, you can't use e-cigarettes and you can't smoke real cigarettes in any of the parks. And it's such a small little thing, but it makes so much sense. It just makes our park cleaner. I mean, our guys, our DPW and Parks and Rec doesn't have to walk around picking up cigarette butts now. I'm sure there's some people who violate the law, but for the most part, we cut down on it significantly, and it just makes our town a better place, in my opinion. So that's my favorite accomplishment. I know it's not the most popular, but it's my favorite.
Considering the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause, how is this done? How is the ban on smoking done?
We have the ultimate rights, according to the state of New Jersey, to ban that, and we did. I mean, due process is you still have your day in court if you get fined. However, the state of New Jersey has given that authority back to us. The municipalities can decide whether or not you are able to prohibit something, and we took advantage of it.
Obviously, we're living in divisive political times. So what can be done to bring the community and the nation as a whole together? And how do you think people can be more involved in their community?
Okay, so we are in very divisive times, but I don't believe that at the local level. I really don't. We have a township committee that's made up of right now four Republicans, one Democrat. We get along very well because at the end of the day, there's one thing most people really want in town, and it's lower property taxes. So I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, you kind of all agree on that. You might disagree slightly on how you're going to get there, but you're mostly on the same page. When you get nationally, that's tough. I don't know how we're going to get out of where we are now, but if you're a student of history, I look at Twitter and Facebook and all the things that we have now, exactly what you had in the mid 1700s, or late 1700s, early 1800s, where everyone had a newspaper and they would print the worst things about their political opponents. Go back, if you ever see the play Hamilton or listen to it, go back and read that, or read the book by Crenshaw. I think that's the name, or Crenshaw. That was by Hamilton. It's a great book. You can get it from the library. I listened to it. I didn't read it. I listened to it on my drives. They would say the worst things about their political opponents. I'm talking the absolute worst. And that's what we're going through now. Innuendos, lies, rumors are being printed left and right, but now it's via Twitter in 140 characters. The same thing's happening, except people would just make up stories and print it and give it out to everyone. So I think we're hitting a low point, but that doesn't mean we're at a final point. You can certainly bounce back, and I think as we move forward, people are going to be so disgusted by what they're reading and they're seeing that it's going to start fading. And I think you're already starting to see that now, where people dismiss things out of hand very quickly when they read it, and they actually do a little investigating. I don't think we're there yet, but we're making that slow trend. As far as how to get involved in the community, go to a meeting. Go to one of our township committee meetings. We have them every other week, right? We have it twice a month. It's a Tuesday. They usually go quick, and you can just learn something. And then go up to us and say, hey, I'd like to volunteer on a board or commission. We have literally probably 500 appointments we have to make every year to people who serve on committees. We love new blood. So it doesn't matter your age, you can come out and serve on one. We have lots of kids who serve on our Youth Services Commission, Parks and Rec Commission. We're always looking for people to serve and give back to the community. So take advantage of it and come out and volunteer.
So what's the most significant difference between Hillsborough when you were younger and now?
It's population change, just the size of our community, how many people live here. The development. I mean, there's so many more farms. I used to shoot bottle rockets off where Amsterdam School is. Like right where the school is, we used to just fire bottle rockets into the air because there was their Amsterdam Drive, the road was there, but there was no houses or schools, so we would just go there. It was open farm that was plowed, and we would just have a good time. I used to ride my bike everywhere. It's not as easy now because of traffic, but we're changing that now. We implemented something called Complete Streets, that whenever you redo a road here in town that's on a major artery, you have to put a bike lane in with sidewalks. So we're starting to get back to that where you could kind of ride and go wherever you want, but it takes time. It definitely takes time. But yeah, the growth of the town's the biggest thing, but that's not always a negative. I mean, if we didn't have growth in town, I might not have been able to buy a house and move back to I never left, or stay in my hometown, I should say.
Yeah. So during World War II, Hillsborough housed Italian and German POWs.
Yes, we did.
Do you know anything about this or any other significant events like this?
Yeah, so that was a big one. That's the other big Hillsborough story I always tell. Where Mountain View Park is, where we built a baseball park with the county, we have so much history there. And when you leave here, you'll see in that glass case I was telling you about, there's some pictures of POWs working at there. But yeah, we brought Italian and German POWs over to there, and they built almost all the railroad systems you see that used to leave Belmead and Hillsborough. They helped build all that. We basically put the POWs to work, and they built all this stuff there. And you hear rumors that some of them stayed here after the war. I don't know if that's true, but you hear that. That was some of the things that we read about. But There's a guy on Facebook you should look up. His name is Greg Gillette. It's Gillette on Hillsborough, and he's got some great pictures and stories all about the history about all the POWs that used to work here. It's pretty cool.
So considering the rich history of Hillsborough, how do you think it will evolve into the future, and do you think this will be for the better or for the worse?
So I'd like to say it's all going to be for the better, but with change, with progress comes change, and not everyone really embraces change. I think what we've done here in town is we preserved 33% of open space. It might be 34% now, so that the town can never be built on those lands. So we have 34% of the town that will never change. It'll always be a park, it'll always be a farm, something like that. I think that's important for our cultural history, right? If we were a farming community, like we have a picture on our flag of a farm, you kind of want to preserve that so people remember what Hillsborough was. I'm gravely concerned about the density of building that is being forced upon us with the affordable housing, how that'll change Hillsborough. It doesn't make it a negative. It doesn't make it a positive. It makes it how do we embrace it. I don't know where we're going to build new schools in the future because we're running out of developable space. I don't know how we increase the size of the high school if we do have so many more students coming in without building a new high school. And if we do build a high school, how do residents pay an extra $1,000 to $1,500 on their tax bill every year to fund that without being forced to leave the town? You know, one of the things that I really believe in is that if you grew up here, you should have the opportunity to live here. And you know, your parents shouldn't be forced to sell their house because they can't afford the property taxes. And yet, when we're being pushed into these situations, people are going to leave. And when people leave, they can't tell stories like I'm telling you because those people left. And then who do you have left in the town? You know, again, that doesn't make it worse. You just lose something. You know, and I think that's, you know, it's important that you're doing this because maybe you preserve a little bit of it so that if I'm not here, someone's going to watch it and say, "Oh my God, did you know about that?" And then maybe they'll take a minute to learn something.
What do you think is the biggest threat facing Hillsborough, and what do you think will be the problem we need to solve, we need to focus on in the future for this town?
I definitely think it's the overdevelopment that's being forced onto us by the state. I mean, I don't understand how we're supposed to build 10,000 units and then still try to keep property taxes low, provide critical services, maintain roads, when you're being forced to build all this with no help from the state of New Jersey, with absolutely no help. And then the Board of Ed, again separate, is being forced to make cuts because they're not getting as much state aid too. I don't understand how you're supposed to continue to move in a positive direction. And you have something crazy like in a town near us, Edison, is their Board of Education is suing the township to stop building. They're begging them to stop building. But they can't because they still have these affordable housing mandates from the state. So it's almost like three people standing in a room going like this with no answers. And you know, I hope we don't get to that point, but I feel like we're just getting closer and closer to just saying, what are we supposed to do? We're not getting any help from the state. You know, we're at this alone, and where do you hit the breaking point for families?
Yeah. Considering that population growth is inevitable and the state will continue to put limits on Hillsborough, how do you think a balance can be struck between bringing people and as well as managing the growth of the population?
So if in a perfect world, the state wouldn't be putting these mandates on us and we'd be able to zone appropriately. I think one thing that gets lost in this affordable housing conversation is that we should provide some affordable housing. You know, no one is saying that. Is that there people do deserve a chance to move back to Hillsborough and live in Hillsborough. I think what everyone gets upset about is the additional units that are being required. So, although, like I said, we have to build 2,000 affordable housing units, why should I have to build 6,000 market rate units or regular units along with that? I think that's where the population growth control really comes into effect. Is, you know, why do you have to do both? No one argues with the affordable housing piece. It's the regular building piece that comes along with it. So, I wish I had an answer for you. I don't. It's going to take generations to really figure that out because the affordable housing numbers have to be complete by 2025. And I don't know if I'm going to be elected that far into the future. I don't know if I'll even run that many times. You know, I'm a relatively young person. I'm only 38 years old, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want to do this till I'm 75. You know, I do believe that eventually you have to turn it over to someone else who wants to run. You know, and like I said, I'm 8 years in, so it might be someone else's turn to try to look at what the future may hold. I think we've done a good job of trying to slow it down in terms of the building that's taking place. But, you know, a lot of the building that you see today also was planned for 10 years ago. So it's, you know, before I even got onto the dais, they were said this is already being allowed. So it's just interesting. I don't know how we easily fix it.
So in the past, Hillsborough was mainly a farming community since its founding days. What do you think Hillsborough's place will be in the future in the state and this country? Do you think it'll be just a place for residents or a place that spurs business? What do you think it'll be?
I think it's mostly for residents. As much as we try to zone differently to bring business here, it's difficult because we are not on like Bridgewater where you have 287, 202, 22, and 78 run through there. You have major arteries, major roadways. I think the only way that changes is if the town or the state activates the West Trenton Railroad, which goes from Bridgewater all the way to West Trenton, which stops along there in several communities like Belmead, Montgomery, Pennington. I think Hopewell's on there too. I think if you activate that, you have more potential for business to come. But if not that, you'll see us mostly as a bedroom community. It doesn't matter. Doesn't mean you won't have great residents and individuals here. It just changes it a little bit.
Yeah. So, do you have any final closing remarks about the importance of history and about Hillsborough and about its history?
My only thing was I would encourage everyone to take a minute and learn as much as they can about the town. Because even if you call it home for a couple of years, it's still your home. And you might be sitting around one day and someone asks you about where you grew up and you could spout off more information than they want like I do. I truly love this town. I have no plans to leave. I would love to be able to spend my entire life here like I've done so far. And just try to give back in as many ways as possible. So I encourage you and anyone else to just take a minute and see how you can give back to Hillsborough.
Thank you for the interview.
No, thank you for interviewing me. I appreciate it.